The glass walls of Wolfe Enterprises reflected the gray skyline like polished steel, cold and untouchable, just like the man who owned it. Every morning, Lena Carter walked through the towering lobby with the same promise to herself: survive the day, keep your head down, and avoid Damien Wolfe at all costs. It sounded simple. It never was. The employees of Wolfe Enterprises moved through the building like nervous shadows whenever Damien was near. Conversations died the moment his footsteps echoed through the halls. Assistants straightened their backs. Managers checked their ties twice. Even senior executives lowered their voices when speaking his name. Some called him brilliant. Most called him terrifying. Lena called him unbearable. She stood near the massive conference table on the 43rd floor, adjusting presentation folders with tired hands while her laptop balanced against her hip. The upcoming luxury yacht retreat for investors had consumed her entire life for 3 straight weeks. She had slept barely 4 hours a night organizing schedules, entertainment, catering, transportation, and security for dozens of powerful guests. And still, somehow, it never seemed enough. "Miss Carter." The deep voice sliced through the room instantly. Lena froze. Damien Wolfe stood at the far end of the conference room wearing a charcoal black suit so sharp it looked carved onto him. Tall, calm, expressionless. His piercing gray eyes scanned the digital itinerary projected behind her. The room went silent. Even the executives avoided breathing too loudly. Damien stepped closer, his expensive shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. "You switched the investor dinner from 8:30 to 8, he said flatly. Lena blinked. The catering director requested an earlier service because of the weather forecast. "You changed it without authorization." His voice never rose. That somehow made it worse. "I was trying to avoid scheduling conflicts." "You were trying," Damien repeated coldly. "And yet now the keynote overlaps with the live performance our guests paid millions to attend." Heat rushed into Lena's face. Around the table, executives shifted uncomfortably, grateful they weren't the target. "It's only a 30-minute adjustment," she said carefully. Damien stared at her long enough to make her stomach tighten. "At Wolfe Enterprises," he finally said, "details are not small things, Miss Carter. Details are everything." The humiliation hit harder because of how calm he sounded. Like she wasn't even worth anger. "I understand," she whispered. "No," Damien replied, gathering the folders from her hands. "If you understood, we wouldn't be having this conversation." The silence afterward felt suffocating. Lena swallowed hard, fighting the burning pressure behind her eyes. She refused to cry in front of him, refused to give him that satisfaction. Damien turned toward the executives immediately, already moving on as if she no longer existed. "Fix the schedule before departure," he ordered. And just like that, the meeting continued. Lena stood there for another second, frozen in embarrassment while her chest burned with fury. Then she quietly collected her laptop and walked out before anyone could see how badly her hands were shaking. The second the conference room doors closed behind her, she exhaled sharply. "I swear to God," she muttered under her breath, marching toward the elevators. "I'm quitting after this trip." The yacht departed 2 days later beneath a cloudy silver sky. It was less a yacht and more a floating palace, 4 decks of glass, marble, and impossible luxury cutting through the dark ocean waters. Wealthy investors laughed beneath crystal chandeliers while champagne flowed endlessly across polished bars. And somewhere among them moved Damien Wolfe, composed as always. Lena spent the evening racing between staff members with a tablet in hand, solving problems before anyone important noticed them. Every time she caught sight of Damien across the deck, perfectly calm in his tailored black coat, irritation twisted inside her again. How could someone look so human and still feel completely unreachable? By midnight, the wind had changed. The ocean no longer rolled gently beneath the yacht. Waves struck harder now, rattling glasses faintly across tables. Dark clouds gathered in the distance like smoke swallowing the horizon. Guests began noticing. "The captain says it's nothing serious," one employee whispered nervously beside Lena. But the crew didn't look convinced. Lena stepped onto a quieter side corridor to finally breathe for a moment. Her feet ached. Her head pounded. That was when she heard Damien's voice through the partially open office door nearby. "Schedule the surgery immediately." Lena paused. Inside, Damien stood alone near the window with a phone pressed to his ear. His expression was tense, not cold. "The child doesn't have time to wait for insurance approval," he said quietly. "Use my private account if necessary." Lena frowned slightly. A long pause followed. "No," Damien continued. "Don't tell the employee where the money came from. I mean it." Something in his voice stopped her cold. Not authority. Pain. Real pain. Lena stared through the narrow opening in stunned silence. The ruthless billionaire feared by everyone in the company was secretly paying for an employee's sick child. And hiding it from them completely. Why? The question lingered heavily in her chest. For the first time since joining Wolfe Enterprises, uncertainty cracked through her hatred. Maybe Damien Wolfe wasn't the man everyone believed he was. Maybe he wasn't even the man he wanted people to see. Suddenly, thunder exploded across the sky. The yacht lurched violently. Lena grabbed the wall as terrified screams erupted from the upper deck. Glass shattered somewhere nearby. The lights flickered hard once. Then lightning tore across the ocean so close it turned the entire world white. A monstrous wave slammed against the yacht with terrifying force. And the ship began to tilt. The world erupted into chaos. Lena barely caught herself against the wall before the yacht lurched again, harder this time, throwing framed artwork from the corridor walls. Somewhere above her, guests screamed in pure panic as dishes shattered across the dining deck. The lights flickered violently. Then half the ship went dark. "Everyone remain calm," a crew member shouted somewhere in the distance, though fear cracked through his voice badly enough to destroy the illusion immediately. Another thunderous impact slammed into the vessel. The floor tilted beneath Lena's feet. Her pulse exploded. She rushed toward the main staircase, gripping the rail as the yacht groaned around her like a wounded animal. Rain hammered the glass windows with terrifying force now, turning the outside world into a blur of black water and lightning. People were running everywhere. One investor stumbled past her, clutching a bleeding forehead. A waitress cried openly while trying to help an elderly passenger stand. Somewhere nearby, alarms began blaring through the ship in sharp, deafening bursts. Lena's breathing turned shallow. This wasn't a storm anymore. Something was very wrong. She reached the upper deck and immediately froze. The ocean had transformed into a nightmare. Massive waves rose like dark mountains around the yacht, swallowing entire sections of the horizon before crashing down violently against the hull. Rain whipped sideways through the air so hard it stung her skin like needles. Furniture slid wildly across the deck while terrified passengers clung to anything they could hold. At the center of the chaos stood Damien Wolfe. Completely soaked by rain, he barked orders at crew members helping passengers into emergency vests. His calmness looked almost unreal against the madness surrounding him. "Get everyone below deck now," he shouted. "The starboard stabilizer is failing," a crewman yelled back. Another violent crash shook the yacht. Several people screamed as the vessel tilted dangerously sideways. Lena grabbed a rail before she could fall. For one horrifying second, she thought the entire ship was about to flip. Damien spotted her instantly through the storm. Their eyes locked across the deck. "Miss Carter!" he shouted over the wind. "Get inside!" A giant wave slammed against the yacht before she could respond. The impact threw Lena violently across the deck. Pain exploded through her shoulder as she crashed into a metal bench. Her tablet flew into the darkness and vanished overboard instantly. The yacht light suddenly died completely. Darkness swallowed everything except the violent flashes of lightning above. Panic spread instantly. People were crying now, praying, screaming names into the storm. Lena pushed herself up painfully, her soaked hair sticking across her face as freezing water rushed over the tilted deck. Somewhere nearby, glass shattered again. Then came the sound. A deep metallic crack, the kind of sound no ship should ever make. Crew members exchanged terrified looks. "The hull's been damaged," someone yelled. Lena's stomach dropped. Another wave crashed over the deck, nearly sweeping 2 passengers into the ocean before Damien grabbed one of them by the arm and dragged him back. How was he still standing? Rain poured down his face as he fought through the chaos toward frightened guests, helping people move while others froze in terror around him. This wasn't the cold executive from the office tower. This was someone else entirely. A bolt of lightning ripped across the sky so close it deafened everyone for a second. And suddenly the entire ocean illuminated. Lena saw it then, a monstrous wall of water rising directly toward them. "Too big! Far too big!" Someone screamed, "Brace yourselves!" The wave hit like an explosion. The yacht groaned violently as water crashed across every deck at once. Lena lost her grip instantly. Her body slammed hard against the railing before icy seawater swallowed her whole. For several terrifying seconds she couldn't breathe, couldn't tell which way was up. The freezing water dragged her across the deck while luggage, broken furniture, and shattered glass spun around her in darkness. She reached desperately for something, anything. Her fingers caught a rail. Lena gasped violently, choking on seawater as she pulled herself upward. The yacht was tilting even worse now. People slid screaming across the deck as crew members fought to launch lifeboats in impossible conditions. One lifeboat crashed sideways into the ship and flipped instantly. The people inside disappeared into the black ocean. "Oh my God," Lena whispered shakily. Fear finally consumed her completely. They were going to die. A loud explosion thundered somewhere below deck. The yacht jerked violently again, and then Damien's voice cut through the storm. "Lena!" She turned. He was fighting his way toward her through rushing water, one hand gripping a railing while the other held onto an injured crew member. For the first time since she had known him, Damien Wolfe looked afraid. Not for himself, for her. The realization hit Lena harder than the storm itself. Suddenly the deck beneath them cracked with a horrifying metallic scream. Everything moved at once. The yacht tilted sharply sideways, throwing passengers into walls and railings as the ship began collapsing toward the ocean. Lena lost her grip. Her scream vanished into the storm as she slid helplessly across the flooded deck. Straight toward the open sea. Lena's fingers clawed desperately against the rain-soaked surface, searching for anything to stop her fall. Nothing held. The deck had become a river of freezing seawater, dragging everything toward the ocean. Chairs, shattered glass, luggage, people. She slammed hard against a metal railing, pain bursting through her ribs. For one brief second, she thought she had stopped herself. Then the railing snapped. The world disappeared beneath her. Ice-cold water swallowed Lena whole. The shock stole every breath from her lungs instantly. Darkness spun around her as violent currents dragged her deeper beneath the surface. The roar of the storm became muffled underwater, replaced by a terrifying silence broken only by the pounding of her heartbeat. Up. Which way was up? Panic exploded inside her chest. She kicked wildly, but the heavy waves twisted her body like a rag doll. Her dress tangled around her legs. Salt water burned her throat as she accidentally inhaled. No. A memory flashed suddenly through her. Mind. Her mother crying at the kitchen table years ago after the Coast Guard declared her father officially lost at sea. The ocean takes people. The thought hit her with horrifying clarity, and now it was taking her too. Lena's lungs burned violently. Her strength was fading fast. Darkness crept into the edges of her. Vision as the storm above became little more than flickering. Shadows. Then a hand grabbed her wrist, strong, unyielding. Lena's eyes flew open underwater. Damien. Even through the chaos, she recognized him instantly. He pulled her upward with brutal force, fighting against the waves as if refusing to let the ocean claim her. His coat dragged heavily through the water. His face tight with effort beneath the flashes of lightning breaking through the surface above them. They burst into open air together. Lena gasped violently, coughing seawater while massive waves crashed around them. "Hold on to me!" Damien shouted. Another wave slammed into them before she could answer. Lena wrapped trembling arms around him instinctively as the storm hurled them through darkness. Broken debris floated nearby, pieces of the yacht scattered across the raging sea. Somewhere in the distance, people were still screaming. Then another lightning strike illuminated the horrifying truth. The yacht was sinking, its massive structure leaned sharply into the black water, while emergency lights flickered weakly across its decks like dying stars. Lena stared in frozen disbelief. Hours ago, people had been drinking champagne beneath crystal chandeliers. Now the ocean was swallowing everything. "Look at me." Damien shouted over the storm. She turned toward him, barely able to keep her eyes open against the rain. "You need to keep kicking, understand?" "I can't," she choked out. "Yes, you can." His voice cut through the panic with fierce intensity. For a moment, there was no cold billionaire. No cruel boss, only a man refusing to let her die. Damien grabbed onto a large piece of floating wreckage and pulled her beside it. Together they clung to the broken wood as monstrous waves carried them farther into darkness. Time stopped, making sense after that. Minutes felt like hours. The storm became endless. Rain hammered their faces, while freezing water numbed Lena's entire body. Several times she nearly lost consciousness, only for Damien to shake her awake again. "Stay with me." The words kept reaching her through the darkness. "Stay with me." At some point, she realized his hands were bleeding badly from gripping shattered debris. At another point, she noticed he kept positioning himself between her and the crashing waves to shield her from the impacts. Why? Why would a man like Damien Wolfe risk himself for her? The question drifted through her fading mind while thunder shook the sky above them. Then suddenly, the waves changed. The violent pull beneath them weakened. Damien looked ahead sharply. Through the rain, land. A dark shoreline appeared between flashes of lightning. Relief crashed through Lena so hard it almost hurt. But the ocean wasn't done with them yet. A powerful wave slammed into the wreckage, tearing it from Damien's grasp. Lena screamed as the current dragged her sideways again. "Lena!" She reached desperately toward him, their fingertips brushed. Then another wave separated them completely. Fear ripped through her chest. "Damien." No answer. The darkness swallowed him whole. Lena crashed violently into shallow water moments later. Sand scraped against her knees as another wave rolled her across the shore like discarded debris. Coughing violently, she dragged herself farther onto the beach. Rain poured down relentlessly. Everything hurt. Her lungs burned. Her vision blurred. Her body trembled uncontrollably from cold and exhaustion. For several seconds, she simply lay there gasping against the wet sand, unable to move. Alive. She was alive. But Damien, Lena forced herself upright weakly, scanning the shoreline through the storm. Nothing. Only crashing waves and darkness. Her chest tightened painfully, then lightning illuminated. A figure farther down the beach. A man lay motionless near the waterline. Lena's heart stopped. She stumbled toward him through the rain, slipping repeatedly in the wet sand until she finally reached his side. Damien Wolfe wasn't moving. His face was pale beneath the storm. Blood mixed with seawater along one side of his forehead. His eyes remained closed as waves crept dangerously close to pulling him back into the ocean. "Damien!" Lena dropped beside him, shaking his shoulders hard. No response. Fear surged through her instantly. She pressed trembling fingers against his neck. Nothing. Oh, God. Her pulse exploded. No, after everything. No, rain streamed down her face as she leaned over him desperately, placing trembling hands against his chest. Then she began CPR. Come on. Lena's hands trembled violently as she pressed against Damien's chest, counting desperately through ragged breaths while rain poured over both of them. Nothing happened. The ocean roared behind her like a living monster waiting to take him back. "Please," she whispered, panic cracking her voice. "Don't do this." She pressed harder. Again. Her arms ached from exhaustion. Her entire body felt frozen after hours in the storm, but she refused to stop. Not now. Not after he had dragged her out of the ocean with his own hands. Damien remained terrifyingly still beneath her. Lightning flashed overhead. Lena leaned down, breathing air into his lungs before continuing compressions, tears mixing with rainwater across her cheeks. "You don't get to save me, and then die," she choked out. Another compression, another breath. Then suddenly, Damien coughed violently. Water burst from his lungs as his body jerked beneath her. Relief slammed into Lena so hard she nearly collapsed. Oh my God. Damien rolled weakly onto his side, gasping painfully while seawater spilled onto the sand. His breathing sounded rough and broken, but it was there. Alive. He was alive. Lena sat back shakily, pressing trembling hands over her mouth as emotion overwhelmed her. She hadn't even realized how terrified she'd been until now. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The storm still raged above them, but the worst of it seemed farther away now, drifting deeper into the ocean. Thunder echoed across the island, while waves crashed against the shore in violent bursts. Damien finally lifted his head slightly. His gray eyes found hers immediately. Even exhausted and half-conscious, there was something intense in the way he looked at her. "Lena," he rasped weakly. The sound of her name in his voice did something strange to her chest. "You're okay," she whispered quickly, almost as if trying to convince herself too. "You're okay." Damien tried pushing himself upright, but suddenly winced sharply in pain. Lena noticed the blood immediately. A deep gash stretched along his side beneath his soaked shirt, darkened further by seawater and sand. "Oh no." Damien glanced down briefly, unfazed. "It's nothing. It's absolutely not nothing." He gave a faint, humorless breath that almost resembled a laugh. Typical Damien Wolfe, bleeding on a deserted island and still pretending everything was under control. Another cold gust of wind swept across the beach, making Lena shiver violently. Only then did she fully realize how freezing they both were. They needed shelter. Now. Lena scanned the shoreline quickly. Dense jungle stretched beyond the sand, dark and unfamiliar beneath the storm clouds. Huge cliffs rose in the distance while twisted palm trees bent violently in the wind. No lights, no people, no signs of rescue. The reality settled over her slowly, horribly. They were alone, completely alone. "You can stand?" she asked quietly. Damien pushed himself up with visible effort. Pain tightened his jaw instantly, but somehow he managed to rise anyway. Lena moved beside him automatically before she could stop herself. Damien hesitated only briefly before allowing her to support part of his weight. His body felt colder than she expected. Weak, too. That frightened her more than she wanted to admit. Together, they staggered away from the shoreline as another wave crashed behind them. Rain continued falling steadily while the island jungle loomed ahead like something ancient and untouched. Every sound felt unfamiliar. Strange insects buzzed somewhere in the darkness. Wind rustled through massive trees overhead. Branches cracked under their feet as they moved deeper inland, searching for shelter. Lena's soaked clothes clung painfully to her skin. Her legs felt heavy with exhaustion, but adrenaline kept her moving. "We should stay near the beach," she said breathlessly, "in case rescue teams come." "They won't come tonight," Damien replied quietly. The certainty in his voice unsettled her. "You don't know that. I know storms like this." For a moment, silence passed between them except for rain striking leaves overhead. Then Damien stumbled suddenly. Lena caught him before he could fall. His breathing had become uneven now. "Damien, I'm fine. You're losing blood." He looked away without answering. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating a rocky overhang farther ahead near the cliffs. "There," Damien said. They reached the shelter several painful minutes later. It wasn't much, just a shallow cave formed beneath jagged stone, but it blocked most of the wind and rain. Lena helped Damien sit carefully against the rock. wall before collapsing onto the ground herself. Both of them were breathing hard. For the first time since the yacht sank, the chaos around them faded enough for reality to fully settle in. No phones, no supplies, no way to contact anyone. The yacht was gone. Everyone they knew was gone. Lena wrapped her arms tightly around herself, trying to stop shaking. Across from her, Damien leaned back against the stone wall with his eyes closed. His wet shirt stained darker around the wound near his ribs. Without the expensive suits, the perfect office lighting, and the intimidating skyscrapers, he suddenly looked strangely human, vulnerable, not like the untouchable billionaire everyone feared, just a man barely holding himself together. The thought disturbed her more than it should. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance while silence settled between them again. Then, Damien spoke quietly without opening his eyes. "You should have left me on the beach," Lena frowned immediately. "What? If I hadn't woken up?" His voice sounded rough with exhaustion. "You would have had a better chance surviving alone." For a second, anger flashed through her disbelief. "You seriously think I would do that?" Damien finally looked at her then, and for the first time since she had met him, Lena saw something completely unfamiliar in his expression. Not arrogance, not control, loneliness. Deep, exhausting loneliness. "You don't even like me," he said softly. The words hit harder than they should have. Lena opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. Because the truth was, she didn't know anymore. Morning arrived slowly, wrapped in pale gray light and the distant sound of crashing waves. Lena woke to the sharp cries of seabirds echoing above the cliffs. For one peaceful second, she forgot where she was, then reality crashed back all at once. The storm, the sinking yacht, the island, Damien. She sat upright immediately inside the rocky shelter, wincing as soreness spread through her entire body. Her clothes were still damp, her hair tangled with salt water, and every muscle felt bruised from the ocean's violence. Beside her, Damien remained asleep against the stone wall, or at least she thought he was asleep. The moment she shifted, his eyes opened instantly, alert, watchful, like a man trained never to fully rest. "You're staring," he said hoarsely. Lena blinked, caught off guard. "You almost died 6 hours ago," she replied. "Sorry for checking if you're still breathing." To her surprise, the corner of Damien's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. The sight felt strange enough to momentarily distract her from everything else. Sunlight slowly crept across the edge of the shelter, revealing more of the island beyond them. Dense green jungle stretched endlessly inland while the beach curved along. Crystal blue water that looked impossibly calm now, as if the ocean hadn't nearly killed them hours earlier. It was beautiful and terrifying. Lena stood carefully and stepped outside the shelter. Warm wind brushed against her skin while waves rolled gently onto the shore below. Pieces of wreckage littered the sand, broken wood, torn cushions, shattered fragments of luxury washed ashore by the storm. No rescue boats, no helicopters. Nothing. A heavy knot formed in her stomach. Damien stepped beside her moments later, one hand pressed subtly against his injured side. "We need water first," he said. "Straight to survival. No panic. No self-pity." Lena crossed her arms. "You say that very calmly for someone stranded on a deserted island," Damien stared toward the horizon quietly. Panic, wastes energy, his cold composure, irritated her again instantly. "How are you this calm?" she snapped. "Do you even understand what happened? People could be dead." His jaw tightened slightly. "You think I don't know that?" Something dark flickered behind his eyes before disappearing just as quickly. Lena looked away first. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Eventually, Damien moved toward the jungle. "Come on." "Where?" "If we stay standing on the beach arguing, Dehydration will kill us before rescue arrives. Lena hated that he was probably right. The jungle swallowed them quickly beneath towering palms and thick green vines. Humidity clung heavily to the air now that the storm had passed, making every step exhausting. Damien moved ahead carefully, scanning their surroundings with surprising focus. "You've done this before?" Lena finally asked. "Something similar," she frowned. "What does that mean?" "My father believed survival built character." That explained absolutely nothing. But before she could ask further, Damien crouched near a cluster of rocks where water trickled faintly through moss-covered stone. Fresh water. Relief washed across Lena instantly. "How did you find that?" Damien shrugged lightly. "Lowest elevation point. Vegetation changed nearby." She stared at him. "Are you secretly some kind of wilderness expert?" "No." "You literally found water in under an hour. That doesn't make me an expert." The frustrating calmness in his voice almost made her roll her eyes. Still, she knelt beside the small stream gratefully, drinking carefully from her hands. The cool water soothed her dry throat instantly. For the first time since the shipwreck, hope flickered faintly inside her. Maybe survival was possible after all. The day passed painfully slowly. They searched the shoreline for anything useful from the wreckage, gathering pieces of wood, rope, plastic containers, and whatever supplies the ocean had returned. At some point, Lena noticed Damien limping more heavily. "You need to rest," she said. "I'm fine." "You keep saying that while bleeding everywhere." He ignored her completely and continued dragging driftwood across the sand. Infuriating man. By late afternoon, exhaustion forced them to stop beneath a group of palm trees near the beach. Lena sank onto the sand heavily while Damien worked silently nearby, building a rough shelter frame from broken wooden panels. Sweat dampened his dark hair now. His rolled sleeves revealed cuts along his forearms from the wreckage. Without thinking, Lena watched him for several quiet seconds. At the office, Damien Wolfe always looked untouchable. Perfect suits, perfect posture, perfect control. Here, none of that existed anymore. Here he looked real, human, and somehow younger, as if the island had stripped away something heavy he usually carried. "You're doing it again," Damien said without looking up. "Doing what?" "Staring." Heat touched Lena's face immediately. "I'm not staring." "You absolutely are." She grabbed a nearby piece of driftwood and tossed it lightly toward him. Damien caught it effortlessly. For the first time since meeting him, she heard an actual laugh escape his throat. Short, quiet, but real. Lena froze. The sound changed him completely. It wasn't cold or intimidating. It was warm, unguarded, dangerously human. Damien seemed surprised by it too because the laugh faded almost immediately. Silence returned between them, though it felt different now. Softer somehow. As sunset painted the sky deep orange and gold, they sat near a small fire. Damien managed to start using fragments of wiring from the wreckage. The flames crackled softly between them while ocean waves rolled gently nearby. Lena hugged her knees to her chest, staring into the firelight. "What are you thinking about?" Damien asked quietly. She hesitated. "My father." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Damien remained silent, waiting. "He disappeared when I was 11, she continued softly. "Cargo ship accident during a storm." Her eyes stayed fixed on the flames. "They never found his body." Damien's expression changed slightly. Almost too slightly to notice. "My mother spent years waiting for him to come home anyway." The fire popped loudly between them. Lena swallowed hard. "I think part of her still waits." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Damien looked toward the dark ocean and asked quietly, "What was the ship called?" Lena frowned slightly at the strange question. "The Aurora Meridian." The moment the name left her lips, Damien went completely still. The fire crackled softly between them, but suddenly the warmth no longer reached Lena. She noticed it instantly. The change in Damien's face. It lasted less than a second, a tightening around his eyes, a strange stillness in his posture. But it was there. And once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. The Aurora Meridian, she repeated slowly. Why? Damien stared into the flames instead of answering. Wind moved through the palm trees above them, carrying the scent of salt and rain from the ocean. Somewhere deeper in the jungle, insects buzzed loudly in the darkness. But around the fire, silence settled like a heavy weight. Lena's stomach tightened. You know the name. It wasn't a question anymore. Damien finally looked at her, his expression unreadable again, cold walls sliding carefully back into place. I've heard of it. That's not what that reaction was. Another pause. Then Damien stood abruptly. We should get some rest. Lena stared at him in disbelief. That's it? You're just going to walk away? We need energy tomorrow. Something sharp flashed inside her chest. There he was again. The cold, unreachable Damien Wolfe she recognized from the office. Not the man who laughed beside the fire an hour ago. Not the man who carried her through a storm. You don't get to shut down every time something becomes personal, she snapped. Damien picked up another piece of wood for the fire, avoiding her eyes. This conversation can wait. No, it can't. The frustration building inside her all day finally broke loose. Ever since we got here, you act like some machine programmed for survival. You never say what you actually feel. You never explain anything. She stood too, anger warming her exhausted body. Do you know how impossible that is for everyone around you? Damien's jaw tightened. I'm trying to keep us alive. And I'm trying to understand who the hell you really are. The words echoed louder than she intended across the empty beach. For a long moment, Damien said nothing. The firelight flickered across his face, casting shadows into the sharp angles of his expression. He looked tired suddenly. Not physically, emotionally, like a man carrying something unbearably heavy. Finally, he spoke quietly. My father left when I was 9. Lena blinked. The sudden honesty caught her off guard completely. Damien stared toward the ocean, his voice low and distant. He walked out with another woman and disappeared for almost 6 years. A humorless smile touched his face briefly. Before that happened, my mother used to laugh all the time. The wind rustled softly around them. When he left, Damien swallowed once. Everything changed. She worked herself sick trying to survive. I learned very quickly that emotions didn't solve problems. Lena stayed silent. I watched people take advantage of weakness over and over again, he continued. So eventually I stopped showing any. The confession didn't sound proud. It sounded tragic. The fire cracked loudly between them. Damien looked down at his hands for a moment before speaking again. You know what the funny thing is? Lena frowned slightly. The more successful I became, his voice softened faintly, the more alone I got. Something about hearing those words from him hurt unexpectedly, because she suddenly realized it was true. People feared Damien, respected him, obeyed him, but nobody seemed to actually know him. Not really. Even now, sitting beside a fire on a deserted island, he looked like a man standing alone in a crowded room. Lena's anger faded slowly into something far more dangerous, understanding. You don't have any close friends, do you? She asked quietly. Damien gave a faint shake of his head. No. The honesty in that single word struck harder than any dramatic confession could have. Lena looked away toward the waves, unsure what to do with the strange ache growing in her chest. She was supposed to hate this man. For months she had hated him easily. But hatred became complicated the moment you saw loneliness inside someone. A gust of colder wind swept across the beach, making Lena shiver. Without a word, Damien removed his partially dry jacket and handed it toward her. She stared at it. You'll freeze. I'll survive. Typical answer. Still, she took the jacket slowly and wrapped it around herself. It smelled faintly like seawater, smoke, and his cologne beneath it all. Far too intimate. Lena hated how aware she suddenly felt of him sitting beside her. The fire burned lower as night deepened around them. For a while, neither spoke again. Then Damien suddenly asked, What was your father like? Lena looked up in surprise. No one had asked her that in years. A sad smile touched her lips before she could stop it. He loved terrible music, she said softly. The kind that embarrasses you in public because he'd sing loudly to every song. A quiet laugh escaped her. And he made pancakes every Sunday, even though he always burned them. Damien listened carefully. "He promised he'd teach me sailing one day," Lena whispered, staring into the flames again. "But he never came home." Emotion tightened painfully in her throat. The ocean suddenly sounded louder around them. "He died because some company ignored safety warnings during the storm," she continued quietly. "That's what the investigation said." Damien went still again. Lena noticed this time. The tension. The guilt. Something dark moved behind his eyes before he masked it quickly. Fear prickled across her skin. "Damien," she said slowly, "why do you keep reacting like that?" He looked at her. For one long moment, it seemed like he might finally tell her something important. But then, a loud crashing sound exploded somewhere near the shoreline. Both of them turned instantly. Lena jumped to her feet. Pieces of wreckage were washing onto the beach with the tide. And among them, a damaged emergency radio. Lena ran toward the shoreline before the next wave could drag the radio back into the ocean. "Careful," Damien called behind her. Cold water splashed against her legs as she grabbed the broken device from the surf. It was cracked badly along one side, tangled with seaweed and fragments of wood, but the antenna remained attached. Hope burst alive inside her chest so suddenly it almost hurt. "Oh my God!" Damien reached her seconds later, breathing harder than before from the strain on his injury. He took the radio carefully from her hands, examining it beneath the pale moonlight. "Well?" Lena asked quickly. Damien turned it over once, checking the damaged battery compartment. "It's not completely destroyed." Relief flooded through her instantly. "So we can call for help?" "Maybe." The single word cooled her excitement immediately. Damien crouched beside the wreckage, pulling loose wires apart with careful fingers while Lena hovered anxiously nearby. The waves rolled around them softly now, nothing like the violent monsters from the storm that destroyed their lives. The calmness felt cruel somehow. "How do you know how to do all this?" Lena asked. Damien didn't look up. "I spent time on boats growing up." "Rich people hobbies?" A faint shadow crossed his expression. "No, just that one word again. Short, closed, final." Lena sighed quietly and knelt beside him in the wet sand. Moonlight reflected across the water while wind lifted strands of her hair around her face. For several minutes, the only sounds were the ocean and Damien working carefully with the radio. Parts then, finally, a sharp burst of static cracked through the speaker. Lena gasped. Damien adjusted the antenna slowly, more static. Followed. Weak, broken, but real. "Oh my God. It works!" Her voice shook with disbelief. Damien frowned slightly, focused entirely on the device. "Barely." He twisted another wire. "Connection." A faint voice suddenly crackled through the speaker before disappearing again into heavy interference. Lena's heart nearly stopped. "There's someone out there." Damien kept adjusting frequencies carefully, but the signal faded almost immediately. Static swallowed everything again. "No, no, no," Lena whispered. Damien tapped the side of the radio sharply. Another burst of noise answered him, then silence. Complete silence. The hope that had flared inside her collapsed just as quickly. "Damn it." Lena stood abruptly, pacing across the shoreline in frustration while Damien continued inspecting the radio with maddening calmness. "Can it be fixed or not?" "Possibly, possibly," she repeated incredulously. "That's your answer?" Damien looked up at her evenly. "I'm trying to avoid lying to you." Something about the quiet honesty in that response stole the anger from her for a second. Still frustrated, Lena crossed her arms tightly. "How long?" "I don't know." The exhaustion in his voice was more noticeable. "Now." Lena looked closer at him and immediately noticed the blood soaking through the side of his shirt again. The movement must have reopened the wound. "Damien." "I'm fine." She almost laughed at this point. That sentence has officially lost all meaning. Ignoring his obvious discomfort, Lena crouched beside him and grabbed his wrist before he could protest. I need to see the injury. I said, it's fine. And I said, stop acting invincible for 5 minutes. Their eyes locked, the stubborn tension between them felt strangely familiar now, almost natural. Finally, Damien exhaled quietly in surrender. Lena carefully lifted the edge of his torn shirt. The wound looked worse than before. Much worse. The cut stretched along his ribs, red and swollen from seawater exposure. Fresh blood stained the makeshift bandage they'd wrapped around him earlier. Lena's stomach tightened. You need proper treatment. What I need, Damien said calmly, is for this radio to work. Even injured and exhausted, he was still focused on survival first, on protecting them. The realization settled warmly and uncomfortably inside her chest. Lena swallowed softly before rewrapping the bandage carefully. Her fingers brushed his skin several times during the process, and each accidental touch seemed to shift the air between them slightly. Too aware, they were becoming far too aware of each other. When she finished, Damien looked at her quietly. Thank you. The softness in his voice caught her off guard. Lena looked away first. You saved my life, she muttered. Consider us even. We're not even. The words came so quietly she almost didn't hear them. Before she could respond, Damien suddenly stiffened. What? He stared toward the jungle behind them. Lena turned. Instantly. At first she heard nothing, except wind moving through the trees. Then, a low growl echoed. Somewhere in the darkness, her blood turned cold. Another growl followed, deeper this time. Lena moved closer to Damien instinctively. What is that? Damien slowly stood despite the pain visible on his face. His eyes scanned the jungle carefully while one hand tightened. Around a long piece of driftwood like a weapon, the growling grew. Louder, branches shifted deep among the trees. Something was moving out there. Something large. Lena's pulse thundered in her ears. We need to move, Damien said quietly. The calmness in his voice somehow frightened her more. Another sound came from the jungle, closer now. Lena grabbed the damaged radio quickly while Damien positioned himself slightly in front of her without hesitation, protecting her again. Moonlight flickered across the tree line as leaves rustled violently. Then, 2 glowing eyes appeared briefly in the darkness. Lena's breath caught in her throat. The glowing eyes hovered between the trees, unmoving. Watching them, every instinct in her body screamed to run. What is that? She whispered. Damien didn't answer immediately. His grip tightened around the broken driftwood weapon while he slowly stepped backward, keeping himself between Lena and the jungle. The eyes shifted slightly. Then a second pair appeared farther to the left. Lena's stomach dropped. Oh God. Low growls rolled through the darkness again, deeper now, accompanied by the sound of branches cracking under heavy movement. Wild dogs, or worse. The island suddenly didn't feel empty anymore. Stay behind me, Damien said quietly. Lena clutched the damaged radio tightly against her chest. Her pulse pounded so hard she could barely hear anything else. Another shape moved between the trees, fast. The moonlight briefly revealed lean bodies slipping through the jungle undergrowth before vanishing again. Predators circling them. We need the fire, Damien murmured. The shelter. Their fire was still burning near the cliffs, but it was nearly 50 yards away across open sand. The growls grew louder. One of the animals stepped partially into the moonlight at last, a large wild dog with matted fur and sharp exposed teeth. Its ribs showed beneath its skin, but hunger burned brightly in its eyes. Lena took an involuntary step backward. The animal immediately reacted. A warning snarl ripped from its throat. Don't run, Damien said sharply. Too late. Fear surged through Lena as another animal burst from the trees unexpectedly on their right. She stumbled backward in panic, slipping against wet sand. The movement triggered chaos instantly. The dogs lunged forward. Damien moved without hesitation. He swung the driftwood hard against the nearest animal as it charged, the impact sending it crashing sideways with a sharp yelp. Another rushed toward them immediately after. "Move!" Damien shouted. Lena scrambled to her feet as Damien grabbed her wrist, pulling her across the beach toward the distant firelight. Behind them, snarling and barking exploded across the shoreline. The animals were chasing them. Sand sprayed beneath Lena's feet as terror drove her forward. The damaged radio nearly slipped from her hands while waves crashed violently beside them. Damien stumbled suddenly. Pain flashed across his face. His injury. Blood darkened his side again beneath the moonlight. But he kept running. Another growl sounded terrifyingly close behind them. Lena glanced back. 3 wild dogs sprinted across the beach after them now, their eyes gleaming with hunger. "Hurry!" she cried. The shelter finally came into view ahead, their small fire flickering weakly near the rocks. Damien grabbed a burning branch the second they reached it and spun toward the approaching animals. Flames illuminated his face sharply. The dogs slowed, growling, circling. One moved closer anyway. Damien stepped forward with the burning branch raised high. "Get back!" The authority in his voice echoed across the beach like thunder. For a tense second, nobody moved. Then one of the dogs snapped aggressively toward the fire. Damien struck the sand hard with the burning wood, sending sparks flying. The animals finally retreated slightly, though their glowing eyes remained fixed on them from farther down the shoreline, waiting, watching. Lena's chest heaved violently from adrenaline as she backed toward the rocky shelter. "We can't stay here if those things keep coming back." "They won't attack the fire directly," Damien said, though his breathing sounded strained now. Lena looked at him properly and fear replaced the adrenaline almost instantly. He was pale. Far too pale. "Damien?" The burning branch slipped slightly in his hand. Then suddenly he collapsed to one knee. "Hey!" Lena rushed toward him as the firelight revealed fresh blood soaking heavily through his bandage now. The chase had torn the wound open completely. Damien pressed a hand against his side, jaw clenched tightly against obvious pain. "You're losing too much blood. I'm all right. You are literally collapsing." Even now, he tried standing again immediately. Stubborn idiot. Lena grabbed his arm firmly before he could fall completely. Together, they moved shakily into the shelter while the wild dogs prowled the shoreline from a distance. Rain clouds drifted slowly across the moon overhead again. Another storm might be coming. Inside the rocky shelter, Damien leaned heavily against the wall while Lena searched frantically through their small pile of supplies. "You need pressure on the wound." "I know." "Then stop pretending this is minor." Her voice cracked harder than she intended. Damien looked up at her quietly, and suddenly Lena realized why she sounded angry. Because she was terrified. The realization hit hard. Terrified of losing him. The thought should have frightened her more than it did. Lena grabbed a clean strip of fabric torn from wreckage and knelt carefully beside him. Her hands shook slightly as she pressed the cloth against his injury. Damien inhaled sharply through his teeth but didn't complain. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly over the ocean. "You know," Lena whispered after several quiet seconds, "a week ago, I honestly thought you were the coldest man alive." A faint, tired smile touched Damien's face. "And now?" She looked up at him. Firelight flickered softly across his exhausted features. Without the walls he usually hid behind, there was something painfully vulnerable about him now. "Now I think you're just someone who forgot how to let people care about him." The words settled heavily between them. Damien stared at her silently. Then, very slowly, his hand covered hers where she pressed against the bandage. Warm, steady. Lena's breath caught softly. Outside, the ocean roared beneath distant thunder while the fire crackled quietly beside them. And for the first time since the shipwreck, neither of them looked away.